At 2:17 a.m. on September 18, 1942, Staff Sergeant Raymond Mitchell crouched in a muddy foxhole on the Henderson Field perimeter, watching rope junction points through binoculars he'd taken off a dead Japanese officer 3 weeks earlier. The ropes hung 18 inches off the ground, suspended between trees in a grid pattern that covered 100 yards of jungle. 35 Marines were positioned in foxholes around him. All of them were watching the same ropes. All of them were waiting for something that might not come. The jungle was dark. Not the clean darkness of open ocean at night, the kind Mitchell knew from fishing off Kodiak. This was thick darkness, the kind that pressed against your eyeballs, the kind where you couldn't see your own hand at arm's length. Rain fell steadily, not hard, just persistent. Drops hitting leaves created a sound like static on a broken radio. The air smelled like wet vegetation and decomposing meat. Something had died in the jungle 2 days ago. Nobody had found it yet. Lieutenant Anderson's voice crackled through the field telephone. "Your rope trick better work, Mitchell. Captain's watching from command post." Mitchell didn't respond immediately. He kept his binoculars trained on junction point 3. The rope there was still. No movement, no oscillation. Just hemp cord hanging motionless in the rain. "They'll touch the ropes," Mitchell finally said. "They always do." "How do you know?" "Because they follow terrain. Terrain forces them through the grid. They don't have a choice." Anderson didn't sound convinced. "If this fails, we're pulling every foot of rope tomorrow morning. Going back to tripwires and flares." Mitchell understood what Anderson wasn't saying. If the rope grid failed, Mitchell's career was over. 3 weeks of work, 500 feet of rope, 35 Marines positioned based on Mitchell's theory about how Japanese infiltrators moved through jungle terrain. If he was wrong, men would die. If he was right, the rope grid would map every infiltrator before they got close enough to kill anyone. The mathematics were simple. In the past 3 weeks, the 1st Marine Division had lost 47 men to night infiltration attacks. 47 Marines who went to sleep in foxholes and never woke up. 47 throats cut in darkness. 47 bodies discovered at dawn with Japanese footprints in the mud around them. Standard defensive measures weren't working. Tripwires triggered constantly. Jungle animals set them off every 20 minutes. False alarms made Marines jumpy. Real threats got lost in the noise. Flares illuminated defensive positions, but not infiltrators. You'd fire a flare, light up 50 yards of jungle, see nothing, and realize you'd just told every Japanese soldier within half a mile exactly where your machine gun position was located. Listening posts failed because you couldn't hear infiltrators over jungle sounds: rain, wind, insects, tree branches rubbing together. A man could crawl past you at 10 feet and you'd never know. The jungle swallowed sound. Sentries spent entire nights listening to nothing, then discovered dead Marines in the morning. Machine gun positions couldn't engage targets they couldn't see. You could fire 300 rounds into darkness and kill nothing but trees. Tracers gave away your position. Muzzle flash made you a target. And Japanese infiltrators didn't panic under fire. They went prone, waited for you to stop shooting, then continued crawling. The problem wasn't equipment or training. The problem was physics. In jungle darkness, visibility was 15 feet maximum, sometimes less. Japanese infiltrators moved 1 inch per minute. They crawled on their bellies for hours. They exploited the gaps between sentries. Standard spacing was 30 yards between positions. That meant 28 yards of dead space where nobody was watching. Infiltrators lived in that dead space. They struck in complete silence. A hand over the mouth, a knife across the throat. Sometimes a grenade dropped in a foxhole. The infiltrator would be gone before anyone realized what happened. Marines would hear a muffled sound, investigate, and find their buddy bleeding out in the mud. The casualties had names. Private James Kowalski from Cleveland, killed August 23rd, throat cut while he slept. Corporal Thomas Reed from Atlanta, killed August 27th, grenade in his foxhole. Sergeant Michael O'Brien from Boston, killed September 2nd, knife wound in the back while he was on sentry duty. The list continued. 47 names, 47 families getting telegrams, 47 empty cots in the barracks. Command issued orders. Avoid engagement when possible. Stay alert. Watch your sector. But the orders didn't solve the fundamental problem. You couldn't shoot what you couldn't see. And Japanese infiltrators were very good at not being seen. Mitchell knew this because he'd survived an infiltration attack that killed everyone else. July 8, 1942, Tulagi Island. Mitchell's squad held a perimeter line, 8 Marines in foxholes spaced 30 yards apart. Mitchell had latrine duty that night. Standard procedure. Every man took a turn walking 50 yards to the designated area, doing his business, walking back. Mitchell's turn came at 3:15 a.m. He was gone 30 minutes, maybe 35, long enough to walk to the latrine, deal with dysentery that had hit half the battalion, and walk back. He heard nothing unusual. No gunfire, no screams, no sound at all except rain and jungle noise. He returned at 3:45 a.m. All 8 men were dead. Corporal Danny Martinez, squad leader, 3 kids back in San Diego, dead in his foxhole. Throat cut so deep his head was nearly severed. Private First Class Eddie Thompson, high school football star from Oklahoma, dead. Knife wound in the chest. Private Robert Chen wanted to be a doctor before the war. Dead. Throat cut while he slept. 5 others, all dead. All killed in the 35 minutes Mitchell was taking a shit. Mitchell had known these men for 18 months. They'd trained together at Camp Pendleton, shipped out together, fought together through Guadalcanal, survived artillery barrages and banzai charges, then died silently in the darkness while Mitchell was 50 yards away. He didn't cry, didn't sleep for 72 hours after that. Just studied the scene, noticed details everyone else missed. The infiltrators had approached from the west. You could see it in the crushed vegetation patterns. They'd avoided the thick undergrowth where dry leaves would create noise. They'd taken a longer route, but a quieter one. They'd moved during wind gusts when sound was masked. They'd exploited the gap between Thompson's foxhole and Chen's foxhole. 32 yards, perfect blind spot. Mitchell measured it, got a tape measure from the supply depot and measured every distance. Thompson to Chen, 32 yards. Chen to Martinez, 31 yards. The infiltrators had moved through that space like water flowing downhill. Natural, inevitable, physics. Command blamed the Marines, said they weren't vigilant enough, weren't following procedures. But Mitchell knew different. The problem wasn't the Marines. The problem was the defensive system. You couldn't watch 32 yards of jungle in complete darkness. Human eyes didn't work that way. He transferred to Guadalcanal on August 15th. Watched Marines die the same way his squad died. Same patterns, same methods, same results. Bodies discovered at dawn. Infiltrators vanished. Everyone acted like it was random. Like Japanese soldiers were ghosts who could pass through defenses invisibly. Mitchell knew they weren't ghosts. They were men following terrain. And terrain could be mapped. Starting September 1st, Mitchell stopped sleeping. Every night he watched the jungle from different positions. Sometimes from foxholes, sometimes from trees, sometimes from no man's land between the Marine perimeter and the Japanese lines. high-risk positions where a random patrol could stumble onto him, but he needed to see how infiltrators moved. He documented infiltration routes, drew maps by hand, used a stopwatch he'd carried since his fishing days to time movements. Noticed patterns that nobody else saw because nobody else was watching patiently enough. Infiltrators used natural depressions, drainage channels, animal trails, places where the ground was already disturbed. They avoided areas with dry leaves, too much noise. They moved during rain. The sound masked their approach. They exploited predictable sentry patrol timing. Sentries checked their sectors every 15 minutes. Infiltrators learned the timing, moved when sentries weren't watching their specific area. September 9th. Mitchell watched a Japanese infiltrator from 20 yards away. The man didn't see Mitchell. Mitchell was downwind, motionless, barely breathing. The infiltrator crawled for 90 minutes, covered 30 yards in that time, moved during wind gusts, froze during calm moments, predictable, methodical, patient. Mitchell didn't shoot him, didn't alert anyone, just watched. The infiltrator passed through the marine perimeter on a scouting mission, returned 3 hours later using the exact same route, same path, same technique, like he was following a highway only he could see. That's when Mitchell understood. Infiltrators weren't random. They followed the path of least resistance, the easiest route through difficult terrain. Mark those routes and you marked the infiltrators. You couldn't stop what you couldn't see, but you could map what you couldn't see if you understood how it moved. The jungle had natural highways. Infiltrators would always use them. Always. Because crawling through thick jungle for hours was exhausting. They took the easy path, the path with fewer obstacles, the path that offered cover and concealment. Mitchell realized he didn't need to see infiltrators. He needed to detect their movement, and movement could be detected with the right system, something that wouldn't alert them, something that would map their positions silently. Something simple. He thought about rope. September 12, 1942. Mitchell sat in the supply depot near Henderson Field, staring at 500 feet of hemp rope from damaged cargo nets. The rope smelled like salt water and diesel fuel. It was stiff from exposure to seawater, dark brown, 3/4-inch diameter, heavy enough to hold tension, light enough to suspend between trees. He'd been sitting there for 2 hours, just looking at the rope, thinking about Kodiak, thinking about crab fishing in Alaska waters before the war, thinking about how he'd mapped crab movements using suspended rope grids between buoys. The method was simple. You didn't catch crabs with the ropes. You tracked them. Set up a grid of lines between buoys. Watched which lines moved when crabs passed underneath. The movement patterns told you where crabs were migrating, where to set your traps. You couldn't see crabs in dark water, but you could detect their movement through rope displacement. Japanese infiltrators were like crabs. They followed terrain features. They disturbed their environment slightly as they moved. You didn't need to see them. You needed to detect the disturbance. Then you knew where they were. The grid design formed in Mitchell's head, not tripwires. Tripwires stopped movement, created noise when triggered, alerted the infiltrator that he'd been detected. That was the problem with standard defenses. They announced detection, gave the enemy information. Mitchell's grid would be different. Silent detection. No alarms, no flares. Just position markers that showed where infiltrators were without telling them they'd been detected. Rope suspended 18 inches off the ground, low enough to be invisible in darkness, high enough to make contact with crawling men. The grid pattern would run parallel ropes every 10 feet, cross ropes every 15 feet, junction points where ropes intersected. When an infiltrator touched any rope, The movement would travel through the entire grid. Sentries watching junction points with binoculars would see which ropes were moving. That would map the infiltrator's position, direction of travel, speed of movement. Everything you needed to know without the infiltrator knowing you knew. Hemp rope would blend with jungle vegetation, natural color, natural texture. Infiltrators might touch it and think it was a vine, might crawl under it without noticing. Either way, the rope would move, and movement was information. Mitchell stood up, found 4 Marines willing to help. Corporal Vincent Russo from Brooklyn, Private First Class James Delgado from Texas, Private Henry Wade from Montana, Private Carl Jennings from Alabama. All 4 had lost friends to infiltration attacks. All 4 were willing to try anything that might work. "We're going into no man's land," Mitchell told them. "High risk. Japanese patrols, friendly fire danger. We work silently. No lights, no talking above a whisper. 2 nights of installation. If we get caught out there, we're on our own." Russo asked one question. "You really think rope will stop them?" "It won't stop them," Mitchell said. "It'll map them. Then we stop them." September 13th, 11:30 p.m., 5 Marines crawled into no man's land, carrying 500 feet of rope. The area between Marine perimeter and Japanese positions was 60 yards of jungle. Technically neutral ground. Practically, it belonged to whoever was willing to risk being there. Mitchell had studied this ground for 2 weeks. Knew every tree, every depression, every natural pathway infiltrators would use. He'd identified the anchor points during daylight reconnaissance. Trees sturdy enough to hold rope tension, positioned correctly to create the grid pattern. Installation started at the western edge. Russo tied the first rope to a banyan tree. The knot had to be solid, strong enough to hold tension, hidden enough to look natural. Mitchell checked it by feel. His hands remembered knot tying from fishing boats. Bowline, clove hitch, trucker's hitch, knots he could tie blind. The rope stretched east. Wade held tension while Delgado positioned the next anchor point. 15 feet away, another tree. The rope needed to be 18 inches off the ground. Mitchell measured by hand, spread his fingers. Thumb to pinky was 9 inches, 2 hand widths, 18 inches, perfect height. Jennings tied the anchor knot, tested tension. Too loose and the rope wouldn't transmit movement. Too tight and it wouldn't move at all. The tension had to be exactly right. Mitchell plucked the rope like a guitar string, listened to the sound. Wrong. Too tight. They loosened it. Plucked again. Better. The rope gave slightly when touched. Would oscillate when disturbed. Would transmit movement to the junction points. They worked across the perimeter, 1 rope every 10 feet running parallel to the Marine line. Then cross ropes connecting them, creating junction points. Each junction point was a detection node, a place where sentries could watch for movement. The work was slow, silent. Every sound felt amplified. Rope sliding over bark sounded like sandpaper on wood. Footsteps in mud made sucking noises. Breathing seemed too loud. Wind helped. When gusts came through, they moved faster, used the sound cover. When wind stopped, they froze, listened, made sure no Japanese patrols were nearby. Mitchell's hands were calloused from years on fishing boats. But rope handling in combat conditions was different. No gloves. Couldn't afford reduced tactile sensitivity. Needed to feel the rope, feel the tension, feel the knots. His hands started bleeding after the first hour. Rope fibers cut into old calluses, opened small wounds. He ignored it, kept working. The jungle floor was mud mixed with decomposing leaves. Everything was wet. Boots sank 3 inches with every step. Had to move carefully. Silent footwork, heel to toe, weight distributed. No sudden movements. Mosquitoes swarmed constantly. Couldn't swat them. Couldn't make noise. Just let them feed. By 3:30 a.m., they'd installed 60 feet of grid. 10 parallel ropes, 6 cross ropes, 12 junction points. They were exhausted, hands bleeding, clothes soaked with sweat and rain. But the grid was working. Mitchell tested it. Touched one rope 30 feet away from a junction point. Watched the junction point through binoculars. Saw the rope oscillate. Movement transmitted perfectly. The system worked. They finished at 4:30 a.m., 30 minutes before dawn. The complete grid covered 100 yards of perimeter, 35 junction points, enough detection nodes to map any infiltrator approaching from the west. They crawled back to marine lines. Nobody had noticed they were gone. September 14th, morning briefing. Mitchell presented the rope grid to Lieutenant Anderson, showed hand-drawn diagrams, explained the detection method, demonstrated with a piece of rope how movement transmitted through the system. Anderson stared at the diagrams. You built a fishing net in no man's land. Not a net, sir. A detection grid. When infiltrators touch the ropes, sentries watching junction points will see which ropes move. That maps infiltrator positions. We wait until all infiltrators are inside the grid, then engage with coordinated fire. What stops them from cutting the ropes? Nothing, sir. But cutting rope creates movement and sound. We'll detect that too. And if they cut ropes, they're announcing their presence. Most won't cut. They'll think it's a vine or ignore it completely. What if they crawl under the ropes? Ropes are 18 inches high, sir. Infiltrators crawl flat, packs on their backs, weapons, slung. They're at least 20 inches off the ground when crawling. They'll make contact. What if they see the ropes? They might. But hemp is natural color. Blends with vegetation. In darkness, it looks like jungle growth. Even if they see it, they probably won't recognize it as a detection system. Nothing like this has been used before. Sergeant Willis was in the briefing. He'd been in the Pacific since Guadalcanal invasion. Lost good men to infiltration. He looked at Mitchell's diagrams and said, "Dumbest thing I've seen since boot camp." Sergeant Kowalski agreed. Japanese will just cut through it. 500 feet of good rope wasted. Sergeant Barnes added, "You think Japanese infiltrators who've been killing Marines for 3 weeks won't notice ropes hanging in the jungle?" Anderson asked the critical question. "Mitchell, you really think this works?" "Yes, sir. I watched them for 2 weeks. They follow patterns. They use the same routes every night. They move through natural corridors. This grid maps those corridors. When they touch the ropes, we know exactly where they are." Captain Reynolds entered the briefing room. He'd been listening from the doorway. Battalion commander, 38 years old, veteran of First World War. He'd seen a lot of ideas. Most didn't work. "Sergeant Mitchell," Reynolds said, "walk me through this one more time. Start to finish." Mitchell explained again the rope grid, the junction points, the detection method, the engagement protocol. How sentries would watch, how they'd map infiltrator positions, how they'd wait until all targets were inside the grid before opening fire. Reynolds looked at Mitchell's service record. Exemplary. 2 years in the Pacific. Survived Tulagi when his entire squad died. Known for being methodical, patient, good under pressure. "You get one night," Reynolds said. "Your sector only, 35 Marines, 100 yards of perimeter. If the grid works, we expand it. If it fails, we pull the ropes and go back to standard defense. Understood? Yes, sir. If men die because of this, it's on you. Understood, sir. Mitchell understood perfectly. This was his one chance. Prove the grid worked or watch it get discarded. Watch more Marines die the same way his squad died. The rest of the company would use conventional defenses. Tripwires, flares, listening posts. Same methods that had failed for 3 weeks. Mitchell's sector was the test case, the experiment. 35 lives, depending on rope, and Mitchell's theory about infiltrator movement patterns. He had until nightfall to prepare. September 18th, 1942. 8:45 p.m. Full darkness. Rain had intensified from afternoon drizzle to steady downpour. Water ran down Mitchell's face, dripped from his helmet, made everything slick. The binoculars were hard to hold steady. He wiped the lenses every 30 seconds, kept them trained on junction points. Perfect infiltration weather. Rain-masked sound. Low. Visibility. Marine sentries were half blind. Japanese infiltrators loved these conditions. Mitchell knew they'd come tonight. The question was when. He sat at the center observation post. 5 other positions surrounded him in a defensive arc. Each position had 2 Marines, one watching junction points through binoculars, one ready with rifle. Field telephone connected all positions to Mitchell's post. The wire ran underground, protected from shrapnel and detection. 35 Marines were positioned in foxholes throughout the sector. Every man knew the plan. Watch the ropes, wait for movement. Don't shoot until Mitchell gives the order. Trust the grid. Trust the sergeant who'd spent 2 weeks studying infiltrator patterns. Some believed, some were skeptical. All followed orders. At 9 o'clock, intelligence radioed an update. Japanese 17th Army observed preparing for night operations. Estimated 30 to 40 infiltrators. Mission: probe Marine defenses, find weak points, kill sentries, create fear. Expected attack time: between 10 p.m. and 3 a.m. Standard Japanese doctrine: wait until Marines were tired. Wait until discipline eroded. Wait until someone made a mistake. Then strike. In other sectors, Marines prepared standard defenses. Tripwires stretched across likely approaches. Flares positioned for quick deployment. Machine gunners at key positions. Listening posts forward of the perimeter. Same defensive posture that had failed for 3 weeks. But it was doctrine. Command approved. Regulation. Mitchell's sector had rope. 10:23 p.m. A tripwire triggered in Sector 4. 400 yards from Mitchell's position. He heard the distant clatter of tin cans, saw a flare arc into the sky. White phosphorus, harsh light. The flare illuminated 50 yards of jungle for 30 seconds. Marines scanned for targets, saw nothing. Probably an animal, a pig or a large rat. The jungle had both. Sentries reset the tripwire, resumed waiting. The flare had announced their exact position to every Japanese soldier within half a mile. Standard defensive procedure: announce yourself. Hope the enemy decides your position is too alert to attack. 11:17 p.m. Machine gun fire erupted in Sector 7. Long burst, maybe 50 rounds. A sentry thought he saw movement, fired into darkness. Tracers streaked into jungle vegetation, hit nothing but trees. No return fire, no bodies. Ammunition wasted. Position compromised. Mitchell listened to the radio chatter. Sector commanders reporting activity, reporting false alarms, reporting tension. Nobody reporting actual contact with infiltrators. But the infiltrators were out there. Mitchell knew it, felt it. 1:34 a.m. A scream from Sector 2, sharp, cut off abruptly. Radio call followed. Sector 2, sentry down. I say again, sentry down. Infiltrator contact. Marines responded, converged on the position, found the sentry dead, throat cut, infiltrator vanished. No tracks. No evidence except a dead Marine and blood in the mud. First casualty of the night. The pattern was emerging. Japanese infiltrators were active, hitting multiple sectors. Standard defenses were failing. Again. Marines were dying. Again. Infiltrators were escaping. Again. Mitchell's sector remained quiet. The ropes hadn't moved. His Marines were getting nervous. Radio chatter from other sectors created tension. Everyone could hear sentries dying. Everyone knew infiltrators were out there. Everyone was waiting. Mitchell stayed calm, kept his binoculars on the junction points, waited. The infiltrators would come. They always used the western approaches. The terrain funneled them toward his sector. Natural corridors, easy paths. They'd come. 2:17 a.m. Junction Point 3 moved. Mitchell saw it through binoculars. Slight oscillation, side to side. Barely visible even when you knew what to watch for. But unmistakable. The rope was moving. Something had touched it. He keyed the field telephone, whispered. All posts. Junction 3 is active. Mark and observe. Do not engage. Sentry Post 2 responded immediately. I see it. Rope moving west to east. West to east meant infiltrator moving from jungle toward marine lines. Speed was very slow. Crawling speed, 1 inch per minute. Standard infiltration technique. Mitchell started his stopwatch, tracked the movement, calculated approach speed. The infiltrator was 35 yards from marine positions. At current speed, he'd reach the perimeter in approximately 4 minutes. 15 seconds later, Junction Point 7 activated. Different location, different infiltrator, also moving west to east. Parallel course to the first one, spacing approximately 20 yards. They were coming in pairs. Classic infiltration tactic. If one gets detected, the other continues. Mitchell radioed. Mark Junction 7. 2 contacts confirmed. Hold fire. 3 minutes passed. More junction points activated. Point 4, point 9, point 12, point 15. 6 infiltrators now inside the grid, all moving toward marine positions, all mapped by rope movement. None of them knew they'd been detected. The ropes transmitted movement silently. Infiltrators touched hemp cord in darkness. Probably thought it was vegetation, vines, roots, natural jungle growth. They pushed past, continued crawling, never realized they were leaving traces. 2:20 a.m., 12 more junction points activated in rapid succession. Mitchell counted carefully. 18 infiltrators confirmed inside the grid, all mapped, all moving. The complete picture formed in his mind. 3-man teams in 6 positions, spacing 10 to 15 yards between teams, approaching marine foxholes from multiple angles. Textbook infiltration assault. This was the critical moment. Fired too early, and some infiltrators escape back to jungle. Fire too late, and they reach marine positions. Mitchell needed all 18 inside the grid. Committed. Too far from jungle. Retreat quickly. Too far from marine foxholes to reach cover. Current distance. Infiltrators were 30 yards from marine perimeter. At current crawling speed, they'd reach foxholes in 4 minutes. Mitchell calculated the kill zone. Maximum effective range for marine rifles in darkness was 40 yards. Optimal engagement range was 20 yards. Close enough for accurate fire, far enough to prevent infiltrators from rushing positions. He waited. Watched junction points, counted movement. 28 yards, 26 yards, 24 yards. The infiltrators were getting closer. His Marines were watching through binoculars, seeing the same rope movements, fingers on triggers, waiting for the order. 22 yards. Mitchell's hands were slick with sweat despite the rain. His breathing was controlled, steady. This was the moment. Everything depended on timing. Too early, some escape. Too late, some reach the perimeter. Had to be perfect. 20 yards. Mitchell lifted the field telephone. His voice was calm, no emotion. One word. Now. 35 Marines opened fire simultaneously. Concentrated fire on 18 mapped positions. The jungle erupted with muzzle flashes. M1 Garand rifles, Browning automatic rifles, Thompson submachine guns. Every weapon pointed at exact coordinates. No warning given, no chance to react. Flares went up immediately after firing started. Standard procedure. Illuminate after engagement begins, not before. The flares lit the jungle. White phosphorus glare, harsh shadows. And there they were, 18 Japanese infiltrators, caught in open ground, exposed, frozen in the light. Some tried to retreat, turned and crawled back toward jungle, ran into the rope grid they hadn't known existed, tripped, fell, died in the mud. Some tried to advance, thought they could reach Marine positions before getting killed, ran into concentrated defensive fire, died before covering 10 yards. Some went prone, tried to return fire, but Marines knew exactly where they were, had been watching them for 3 minutes. Every infiltrator was a mapped target, easy to hit. Mitchell coordinated through field telephone. His voice was mechanical, precise. Post 2, shift fire to Junction 12. Post 4, 3 targets at Junction 7. Post 5, suppressing fire on Junction 15. Every Marine knew where every infiltrator was. The rope grid had given them complete battlefield awareness. Infiltrators were fighting blind. Marines were fighting with perfect information. 90 seconds after Mitchell said, "Now," the firing stopped. Silence. Rain continued falling. Smoke from gunpowder mixed with jungle humidity. The smell was acrid. Burned propellant and blood. Flares still burned. Illuminated the killing ground. Bodies lay scattered across 100 yards. Some were still. Some were twitching. None were fighting back. Mitchell radioed each post. Report casualties. Post 1, no casualties. Post 2, no casualties. Post 3, no casualties. Post 4, no casualties. Post 5, no casualties. 0 Marines hit. 35 men still alive, still combat effective. The rope grid had worked exactly as Mitchell predicted. Detected infiltrators, mapped their positions, allowed coordinated engagement, perfect defensive victory. 18 Japanese infiltrators were dead. 0 Marine casualties. The mathematics had reversed. For 3 weeks, infiltrators had killed Marines with impunity. Tonight, Marines had killed infiltrators without taking a single casualty. The grid had turned invisible enemies into mapped targets, had given Marines the information advantage, had proven Mitchell's theory. Japanese infiltrators weren't ghosts. They were men following terrain, and terrain could be weaponized. 6:15 a.m., September 19th, 1942. First light. Mitchell and Lieutenant Anderson walked the rope grid. Counted bodies, 18 confirmed kills. All Japanese infiltrators had died within the grid boundary. None reached Marine positions. None escaped back to jungle. The rope system had contained them perfectly. Body positions told the story. Some died crawling, caught in the initial volley, still in prone position, faces in the mud. Some died running toward Marines, caught advancing, bodies sprawled forward. Momentum carried them 3 feet after death. Some died retreating, caught fleeing, bodies facing the jungle, hands outstretched like they were swimming through mud. Several were tangled in the rope grid, tripped while trying to escape. Fell. Got rope wrapped around ankles and wrists. died struggling. None of the dead were more than 5 yards from a junction point. The grid had mapped them with perfect accuracy. Weapons recovery showed this was a serious assault force. 18 Type 89 grenade launchers, 18 Type 14 pistols, 18 combat knives, Bangalore torpedoes for cutting wire, grenades, demolition charges. This wasn't a probing patrol. This was a coordinated attack meant to breach Marine defenses and kill dozens of men. The rope grid had stopped it cold. Meanwhile, casualty reports came from other sectors. Sector 2, 1 Marine killed, 1 wounded. Sector 4, 2 Marines killed. Sector 7, 1 Marine wounded. Total across the entire Henderson Field perimeter, 3 Marines dead, 2 wounded. Standard defenses had failed again. Tripwires, flares, and listening posts couldn't stop infiltrators who knew how to exploit gaps. Mitchell's sector using rope grids, 0 casualties. Captain Reynolds arrived at 7:30 a.m., inspected the grid personally, walked the junction points, touched the ropes, felt the tension, watched how they oscillated when disturbed. He was a First World War veteran, had seen trench warfare, had seen innovation under fire, understood immediately what Mitchell had created. "How much rope would you need to cover the entire perimeter?" Reynolds asked. Mitchell had already calculated it. 2,000 feet, sir. Maybe 3,000 for complete coverage. Depends on terrain features and anchor point availability. "Get the rope. Install it tonight. I want every approach covered by dawn." "Yes, sir." Reynolds looked at the 18 bodies, looked at Mitchell. "You saved 35 lives last night. Maybe more. If these infiltrators had hit other sectors, we'd have lost a dozen men minimum." Mitchell didn't respond, just looked at the rope grid, thought about Martinez and Thompson and Chen and the 8 men who died on Tulagi while he was taking a shit. Thought about how simple the solution was. Hemp, rope, and patience. Nothing complex, nothing requiring advanced technology, just observation and understanding. September 19th, morning briefing. Reynolds presented the rope grid to Lieutenant Colonel Merritt Edson, battalion commander. Edson was skeptical. Same initial reaction as everyone else. Rope grids seemed too simple, too easily defeated. But statistics don't lie. Mitchell's sector, 18 enemy killed, 0 friendly casualties. Other sectors, 20 enemy engaged, 3 friendly killed, 2 wounded. The mathematics were clear. Rope grids worked. Standard defenses didn't. Edson authorized full perimeter installation. Immediate implementation. No more testing. The results spoke for themselves. Installation timeline was aggressive. September 19th through 22nd, 3 nights of work. 50 Marines involved. Multiple supply runs to acquire enough rope. 8,000 feet total. Mix of hemp and manila. Whatever could be scrounged from damaged cargo nets, abandoned ships, and supply depots. The entire Henderson Field perimeter got gridded. Junction points mapped. Sentries trained on detection methods. Mitchell conducted classes for all perimeter sentries, taught what to watch for: rope oscillation patterns, speed indicators, direction of movement, how to count infiltrators by tracking contact points. He emphasized discipline. Watch first, shoot later. Map all targets before engaging. Coordinate fire through field telephone. Never reveal detection until all infiltrators are inside the grid. Patience was the weapon. Information was the advantage. 180 Marines trained in 4 days. Some learned quickly. Some needed extra instruction. But everyone learned. The alternative was dying in foxholes with your throat cut. That was strong motivation. September 23rd, second test. Japanese sent another infiltration force. 24 infiltrators hit multiple sectors simultaneously. All sectors now had rope grids. All sentries knew the detection method. Result: 24 infiltrators detected, 22 killed, 2 captured alive, 0 Marine casualties. The captured infiltrators were interrogated. Both said the same thing. They never saw the ropes, touched them while crawling, thought it was vegetation, vines or roots, natural jungle growth. Never understood how Marines detected them, never knew they were being mapped. Never realized they were walking into a kill zone until firing started. One captured lieutenant said, "We believed we were invisible. We have infiltrated American positions for 3 weeks. Always successful. Tonight, we were expected." "How did you know we were coming?" The interrogator didn't tell him about the ropes. Let him think Marines had some kind of magical detection ability. Psychological warfare. Let the enemy think you can see through darkness. Let them think you have supernatural awareness. Fear is a weapon. The statistics transformed completely. August 20th through September 17th. Before rope grids, 47 Marines killed by infiltration, 23 wounded. Approximately 60 Japanese infiltrators killed. Kill ratio: 0.85 to 1. Marines were losing. September 18th through October 15th. After rope grids, 4 Marines killed by infiltration, all in non-gridded areas during the first week. 8 Marines wounded. 127 Japanese infiltrators killed. Kill ratio: 31.75 to 1. Complete reversal. Average nightly casualties before rope grids: 2.1 Marines killed. Average nightly casualties after rope grids: 0.14 Marines killed. 84% reduction. Japanese 17th Army noticed. Intelligence reports captured in October referenced American rope barrier system. Warned infiltration units to avoid Henderson Field perimeter. Recommended alternative targets. Acknowledged Marine defenses had become impenetrable at night. The Japanese shifted tactics, stopped sending infiltration patrols to gridded sectors, focused on daytime artillery attacks instead. Infiltration attacks declined by 84% in October. Marine morale improved dramatically. Sentries could sleep in shifts. The infiltration threat was neutralized. By October, other Marine units requested rope grid specifications. Mitchell wrote a 14-page manual. Rope grid detection system for night perimeter defense. Included installation instructions, rope tension specifications, junction point positioning, sentry training procedures, engagement protocols. Everything needed to replicate the system. The manual was distributed across the Pacific Theater. November. Rope grids installed at Tulagi, the same island where Mitchell lost his squad. December. Army units in New Guinea adopted the system. January 1943. Used at Bougainville. February. Standard equipment for all Marine defensive positions. Variations emerged. Some units added wire to the hemp rope, more durable. Some added small bells at junction points for audible detection. Some used phosphorescent paint markers for visual detection at night. But the core principle remained. Detect movement through grid pattern. Map infiltrators. Engage when all targets are exposed. European theater units requested information. The system was used in Italy against German night patrols. Modified for different terrain. Less effective in open ground. Highly effective in forests. Became standard doctrine in jungle warfare manuals. October 15th, 1942. Mitchell was promoted to gunnery sergeant. November 3rd, awarded the Silver Star. Citation read, "For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in developing defensive innovations that saved numerous Marine lives and significantly reduced enemy infiltration effectiveness." December. Mitchell was pulled from Guadalcanal, transferred to Marine Corps Schools, Quantico, Virginia, assigned to Training Command. His job was teaching rope grid tactics to new officers, training instructors who would spread the technique throughout the Corps. Mitchell hated it initially, wanted to stay with his unit, felt like he was abandoning his Marines. Captain Reynolds explained the mathematics. You saved 35 lives in your sector. Now you can save 3,000 lives across the Pacific. Which matters more? Mitchell accepted the assignment, spent 1943 through 1945 training Marines, taught rope grid tactics to over 800 Marines, developed variations for different terrain types, wrote 3 training manuals, became known throughout the Marine Corps as Rope Grid Mitchell, never talked about the Tulagi massacre, never mentioned his dead squad, just taught the grids, saved lives through instruction. War ended August 1945. Mitchell returned to Kodiak, Alaska, went back to commercial fishing, used rope grids to map crab movements, back to the original purpose. Successful fisherman for 34 years, married, had 3 children, never talked about the war with his family, never mentioned Guadalcanal or Henderson Field or the 18 infiltrators who died in 90 seconds. His children remembered one detail. Their father had nightmares, would wake at 2:17 a.m., exact time the ropes first moved, would sit on the porch in darkness, would watch the trees. Never explained why. Raymond Mitchell died February 3, 1981, age 64, Kodiak Daily Mirror. Obituary: local fisherman and World War II veteran Raymond Mitchell passed away. One paragraph mentioned military service. Served with distinction at Guadalcanal. Didn't mention rope grids. Didn't mention 18 infiltrators killed. Didn't mention 127 enemy killed in 4 weeks. Didn't mention hundreds of Marine lives saved. His children found his silver star in a tackle box after he died. Found the citation. Read about defensive innovations. Had no idea what it meant. A fishing buddy explained, "Your dad invented a rope system that stopped Japanese infiltrators, saved a lot of lives." The children were shocked. Their father never mentioned it, not once in 35 years. What Mitchell told a reporter in 1945, his only interview, "I just watched how they moved and figured out how to map it. Nothing special. The Marines who manned the grids did the hard part. They're the heroes. I was just a fisherman who knew about ropes." That's how innovation happens in war. Not through committees or engineering departments. Through sergeants who watch patiently, understand patterns, and don't wait for permission to save lives. If you found this story as compelling as we did, please hit that like button. Subscribe for more forgotten stories from World War II. Drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. Thank you for keeping these memories alive.